Hello and welcome to Insightful Sisters. Tonight you'll hear episode 1 in a 2-part interview with Biology in Medicine. You may notice tonight that one of our interviewees is dubbed in. We've done this to help protect her anonymity, and we have done our best with the dubbing process, but please do bear with us. Having said that, I hope you enjoy the episode, and thank you for listening.
I'm Jane.
Hi, I'm Claire.
Hi, I'm Alice.
And I'm Beth.
And this is
Insightful Sisters.
Hello, everybody. We're really lucky tonight. We've got a filia find. We've got representatives from Biology and Medicine with us. They describe themselves as doctors and colleagues interested in sex-based medicine. Doesn't sound like a big ask, but apparently it is. So we've got Alice and Claire with us tonight. So a little bit about you both first. Shall we start with you, Claire?
I'm a GP and I really got into it when I saw a patient who presented in crisis on estrogen and with suicidal ideation. And I just kind of casually put in the conversation, when was he next getting seen by the Gender Identity Clinic, the GIC? And he said he'd been discharged, and I was quite horrified that he'd been discharged quite so soon after being started on cross-sex hormones. And then over time, I just started to see more patients, young patients in their 20s transitioning. I'd moved to work in a more deprived area and assumed, quite naively, that there wouldn't be so many patients there. And I was horrified that actually there were significantly more patients who were under the local GIC. And many of them, in fact, all of them, were under the community mental health team, having never been under them before. They presented as a very vulnerable population. Looking into it a bit more and asking about the treatment protocols, it just seemed that the protocols for the most GICs was to transition a patient, get them stable on hormones for a year, and then discharge them into primary care with no follow-up. They'd been discharged from a specialist service and would be really dependent on GP care for the rest of their life. And GPs were getting no advice or help.
That's horrifying. It's actually horrifying, that thought that you could just do this procedure and then send somebody off. I'm going to pass across to you now, Alice. So what about you? How did you get into this?
Hi, so I'm a GP in Cambridge. I work in urgent care, actually, but over the years, I've worked in various different practices. 15 years ago, I was looking after a couple of trans-identifying patients. One was a lovely man, a woman who had transitioned to, and, I thought of him very much as a man. But actually, looking back over it, he was in a relationship with another woman. So this was a lesbian relationship with one of them identifying as male. And he had the beard, and he had these terrible, terrible scars on his chest from mastectomy. And I just wondered if the reason for his feeling that he needed to be present as a man was that he was in this relationship which wasn't really allowed. So it was much easier for them to be in a apparently heterosexual relationship. And I did wonder if there was some homophobia going on there. And I just felt it was really sad for them that that's what they had to go through. And the pronouns thing is very difficult, isn't it? People will judge me for whether I say him or her. But I met him as a man. But now I feel of him that he is actually female. And it's a very difficult thing, and it's part of my journey, really. Yeah. So I moved, I was working in a central Cambridge practice for a bit and met mainly young men who believed that they were female. And then somebody described what a TERF was, and I was sort of a bit horrified by that. But then now in the last few years, it's been far more that I've been seeing young women who are saying that they're male, and they're distressed students, and you see them. And one of them in particular just broke my heart. She said to me, has a really bad patch of mental health for a few years. And she just looked at me with these sad eyes, because in that time, in that patch of bad mental health, she'd lost her breasts, her voice had deepened, she got stubble on her chin. And she said to me, I'm okay now. And I just felt that the medical profession had let her down. It's just, my profession is doing this to people, and I really, really struggle with that.
Yeah. It's interesting, the pronoun thing, because We've had many discussions about that on here. And I think sometimes the people who are actually at the coalface on these things, meeting people, as you say, in different stages in their life, it does get very confusing. It is very confusing. So I don't think we should judge each other. It's hard enough talking about this stuff anyway without criticising each other. I'm interested to know a bit more about biology and medicine. How did that start?
Was desperate for an outlet for all my frustration and rage at all these kinds of things happening. And I met up with people who were starting up the scene in health. And I think you've had people talking on the podcast from them. And that was really great place to meet people, and sort of finally I could talk about these things and it was okay. And actually, from out of that, Claire and I met and a few other people, and we made this new group because we wanted to talk about the medical harms, which was a bit different from the scene in health aims. And really, from there, we've built up our Substack and our Twitter. But really, now we're sort of thinking about what can we do next.
Yeah, so I was probably looking into things maybe for a year or so, quite deeply. And then I joined Scene in Health. And like Alice said, we got chatting, and I think we were both concerned about GPs prescribing, and we just wanted to be able to inform GPs of the harms, and we wanted to tell them that they didn't have to prescribe. They were under no obligation to prescribe this. When I looked into the GMC guidelines, the BMA guidelines, RCGP guidelines, they were all almost telling GPs that they should be they were telling GPs that they should be prescribing. And it just felt that there needed to be a group that was reassuring GPs that they didn't and really exposing the harms being caused to patients. So that's why we started the group, to just try and empower doctors and clinicians to be able to say no.
Yes, Claire's been great on producing information for doctors and what we don't have to do. And we've also been trying to write letters to various organisations to try and put pressure on them. But we're only a small organisation, and we need to get. We're trying to build our base so that we get more people involved and put more pressure on these organisations. Really.
Well, hopefully after this, we'll have some listeners who can send the link to this to their own GP practice. That would be
yes,
good, wouldn't it?
That would be great. Yes, go and look at our Substack. We've got the things for them to have a look at.
I'm going to pass across to Beck.
Hi, both. You're right.
Yeah.
So, listening to stories there about how you first became involved, and just in general, when I think about this topic, something that really concerns me is often the lack of info and advice that's given to people at the start or before they decide to transition. You hear all sorts of stories, young women asking, if I choose to detransition, will my breasts grow back? Things about puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones being completely reversible. It seems like there's a bit of a failure in applying best practice and making sure that patients are giving informed consent. I wonder if you could talk to us about your experience or insight into that.
I can just talk a bit about the experience with some patients I've seen, I guess. For example, I had a patient that presented with vaginal atrophy and urinary incontinence. And when I brought this into conversation and suggested that it was almost certainly the testosterone that was causing this, it was clear that they weren't aware of potential problems. They hadn't known. It kind of horrified me that when I said your urinary incontinence is probably due to testosterone, there was a blank look. It wasn't like, of course it is. I was told that this might happen. It's really sad that a patient is transitioned and isn't advised about irreversible long-term harms like urinary incontinence, which is almost inevitable because of the effects of testosterone. Patients are not being fully informed about the long-term harms. And I've reviewed about 9 care agreements from GICs in the UK, and there's no consistency at all. No clear messages about adverse effects or long-term monitoring. That's a great concern. And that in itself shows that there's no uniform consent process. And so there'll be patients that are told some things and not others. So I really don't believe patients can have been fully informed about the long-term harms. They can't be, because a lot of the harms are not known because there's not enough evidence on it. But also, They're just not being told about what is known, which is horrifying. Women on testosterone, increased risk of ischemic heart disease, increased risk of stroke, increased risk of mood disorders, and increased risk of early mortality. I'm not sure patients are giving consent for those potential risks when they sign the form for cross-sex hormones.
Yes, absolutely. So puberty blockers, which are said to be reversible, you just stop the puberty blocker and your puberty continues. It's in no way can we think of it as a harmless time to think. If you miss your puberty window, then you don't actually develop properly. You don't actually have that opportunity to become adult. And what's really sad is people who go onto puberty blockers, actually, there's some evidence that they lose IQ, they lose their mental abilities. And this is something you just don't see in other kinds of treatment. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is that you don't reach your sexual maturity either, especially obviously if you're taking cross-sex hormones. So we've got these children who stay with a kind of childlike brain and stay with some kind of not quite adult body, who don't actually get to sexual maturity. And I think most people think that sex is quite important when they become adults, but we're taking that away from children as they develop. And they will never actually know what they've missed because they haven't got that brain development to understand what they've lost. And the added to that is that a lot of these children are same-sex attracted, young lesbians, young gay boys. And we're doing this to a group that should be particularly protected. And I just think there's so much awful things that are happening to groups that we should be looking out for.
I mean, it's really concerning stuff. It's concerning for patients, but you also mentioned there, Claire, about the lack of proper research into the effects of these treatments and the lack of follow-up too. And that's scary for patients. That's also quite scary for GPs and for doctors and for prescribers who are supporting them on this journey, surely, because even if they wanted to, with the best intention in the world, wanted to give the best advice, they themselves maybe wouldn't be able to really have a good idea.
Absolutely. Medicine, testosterone, estrogen, and puberty blockers are being used off licence. The CAS review found that they lack robust medical evidence, as did the US report. They are known to cause long-term irreversible harms. Patients are almost being dumped into primary care, which is a huge disservice to patients. And it wouldn't happen in any other speciality where medicine was being used off licence. They would not be discharged into primary care. If they were, there would be a very robust protocol for GPs to follow with advice as to when to refer the patient back urgently. The patient would have regular routine follow-ups by a specialist consultant. So yeah, I'm actually surprised that any GP can sign a prescription because of the risks with the medication being off licence, because the GMC does state, under the guidance for good medical practice, that responsibility lies with the prescriber, which is the GP. They are responsible for any long-term harms caused to the patient if they prescribe. It also means that GPs are leaving themselves wide open to litigation because medicines are being used off licence, lacking robust medical evidence.
It's a scary thought for GPs, really, isn't it?
Yeah. And I don't know if GPs are really thinking about that. But the more frightening thing is the harm being caused to the patient. It's a huge responsibility for the GP to sign that prescription.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure that GPs aren't entering into their profession with any intention to do harm. So you just think that GPs are perhaps not thinking about that at this stage or not aware of what's really going on, or?
Yeah, I think some GPs are probably doing it to help out. We're very good at helping out secondary care. There will be GPs that are happy to prescribe as well, but I think the majority of GPs just aren't aware of the risks. I'm not even sure if every GP would know about the CAS review because the information is just not getting out to GPs. The CAS review isn't mentioned in any of the guidelines to GPs, like the BMA, the RCGP, and the GMC guidelines. None of them mention any kind of guidelines or safeguarding that came up with the CAS review.
So one of the things that has really got me really wound up is the information that's on the NHS website. So if you look at, for example, the chest feeding page, it talks about how it talks about whether people are able to chest feed their babies. And it just really upset me, because if you look at the page, it just doesn't have sensible information for people, either for women who've had mastectomies, who've had top surgery, or for people who are thinking about how they might feed a baby from their chest. But how can you feed a baby from their chest? You have to feed a baby from a breast if it's going to be, human milk. I mean, obviously you can use a bottle, but if you've got... Anyway, I wrote a letter to Wes Streeting and the NHS just to say, look, we really can't have information like this up on the website, because it's wrong and people could come to harm from it. And actually, when you come to feeding babies, you've got to think about the baby's needs. And that's just really important. And there's lots of other information on the NHS website, which I feel we really should be concentrating on how to get the right information for people who need it. And that actually includes our transgender patients, because they really need to know about this stuff. They need to know that if trans-identifying female, a trans man, if that person does become pregnant, then they might have some parts of their breasts, some lobules left. And actually they might get, the pregnancy hormones will make those bigger, and it can cause real pain and cysts, because the milk that's developing there has got nowhere to go. And it's tragic that people don't actually understand this. I suppose the other thing about top surgery, which people don't realise, is mastectomy top surgery, you lose the sensation in your chest. So your chest is completely numb. You're not going to feel anything there anymore. And one of the things that brings another thing in that's really tragic is that's the kind of hug response, the hug hormone, a baby, and hugging the baby to your chest, and you get the hormonal response there. But also, from a point of view of partners or family members, if you give somebody a hug, you get those hormonal releases, but you don't if you don't have the sensation. I think it's really sad that people don't understand that. And we're letting people down, we really are, by not having this information available.
Yeah, I mean, it's shocking that it's sort of infiltrated so many areas of healthcare, really.
Awful.
What I'm going to do is pass over to Jane now, just because she's wanting to talk about some of the long-term impacts all of this is having.
You've both mentioned the mental health issues here, and we've interviewed parents of children who identified as trans, and the pain and the anguish that those parents feel. This is like a boulder, isn't it, running through a family? Do you often find parents coming in and needing additional help and support to get through their days?
My experience has really just been with adults. I haven't seen any children transitioning. So I've really just seen the patients as individuals. But certainly the patients I've seen, all of them have been under the community mental health service, and some of them have been diagnosed with autism post-transition. It's been noted in our practice as well that patients are unhappier following transition. That's noticeable. It's a clear negative impact on their mental health. From what I've seen, it's not making them happier. And there's an insecurity as well, a vulnerability. When you see patients, they're not happy.
I'd agree with a lot of that. And I see the young women who come in to see me often and say that they're boys, young men, they seem so unhappy already. And I just wonder if we should be working on their mental health and their physical health and making sure that they're generally looking outwards and thinking about getting on with their lives, rather than they seem to be very fixated on all the things that are going on, and they seem to be sort of very closed in, and you just sort of feel as though you want to give them a hug and say, come on, things will be all right. Let's get you feeling better about yourself. Diets can be really poor, lack of exercise. And then you get a kind of identity of being unwell. And with that comes the trans identity as well. And I think they're looking for something. Lots of people, they're looking for something. They're looking for a community. They're looking for the fix to all their problems. But I just don't think that this is it. And actually what we're doing what the medical profession is doing, which I really, really hate, is it's turning healthy bodies into unhealthy bodies. We're making people unwell, and we shouldn't be doing this. None of this stuff is going to be of any benefit. And we know that people get more unwell. They lose their physical health and they lose their mental health. And we see increased rates of things like suicide in people who've gone through some kind of transition. And it's just horrifying.
It's hot. It's just awful. And you've been caught into this. How did that happen? How do you think that happened? That a science-based profession got caught into this?
I think activists have managed to convince the governing bodies and the health boards that the way to be kind is to help transition. I think that somehow activists have got a foothold on it. I'm just not sure how that happened, but they have. And it seems to be that voice that is being listened to rather than the medical profession.
I don't know. I think that the medical profession has to hold its hands up and talk about the harms that we've allowed. I think, remembering so it used to be sort of older folk who'd actually gone past, got towards middle age. The trans-identifying female that I was talking about earlier, she would have been sort of certainly older, middle-aged before she transitioned. So I don't think she'd transitioned as a very young woman.
No.
And so I just think it's become earlier and earlier. And I think that's where we've got a lot of the things going wrong, to think that because there are some older people who it seems to work for on whatever measure, and you can argue about whether we should be doing it anyway in that group, but it's become the age at which people are being accepted as being reasonable to transition has got younger and younger and younger.
And the CAS review.
Well, the CAS review has meant that hopefully, this shouldn't be happening and is not happening with the sanction of the NHS anymore. But we do know that there are still private clinics and people are still getting hormones from abroad. So you were asking earlier about children, and actually I have seen a mother and a child who came to see me. And this girl, she had this sort of baggy suit on, and she wouldn't really look at me. And she came in with a cold and a poorly chest, so I had to examine her. She was really uncomfortable about my doing so, and mother was saying that they were getting hormones from abroad, and her mother was facilitating it, and I felt terrible for them, because these children, they will never properly be accepted as the other sex, either medically, biologically, and they won't be accepted as the other sex in law either. And so they're just going to be this sort of separate group of people that don't really fit in anywhere because of something, having poor mental health when they were young. And I just think, people with mental health conditions should not be being treated with hormones.
And I mean, I watched the latest video, I think it was by Helen Weberly of
Yes.
Gender GP. I think she was folding washing and telling us in a patronising tone how transphobic we were for trying to stop young people from ordering medicines in various ways because they would do it anyway. And it was so distressing. And she was so smug about it. And I thought that the harm that this could do, because we don't really know, do we? That's the thing about this. We haven't had a long-term study. We don't really know. There's various studies that have shown all sorts of harms.
I think we know enough to know that it's a really bad thing to give puberty blockers to children or to give cross-sex hormones. And actually, the puberty blocker ban does protect boys, young men, quite reasonably. But for girls, if they're given testosterone, then that in effect can block their estrogen. They're not protected quite so well. And anyway, they get more dramatic changes more quickly. And so we've just got to stop all the puberty blockers, all the cross-sex hormones, and all the other drugs as well, which can affect sex hormones. So there are some other ones as well. And just all of those must be prohibited in the under 18. And actually, when you turn 18, you don't actually complete adolescence until much older than that. And if anyone who's got sort of children or young adult children, or if you remember yourself at that age, they're all a bit stupid. Young people do stupid things. And actually, the adults around them should be there just to make sure that they're okay while they're growing up. And then, do you know what? When they're older, when they've had the chance to have a family, when they've had the chance to understand about adult relationships, if middle-aged men then want to go and sort of do something, that's up to them. Although you have to remember that most people who are trans, most men who are trans don't, as I understand it, go through any kind of surgery at all. I think what I'm fighting back at is that there's a puberty blocker trial that people are talking about funding, and that, I believe, would be absolutely wrong for it to go ahead, because we know enough to know that the puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones will damage children. There is evidence out there. There will be data out there. What hasn't happened is that we haven't had it collected together so that it's analysed and seen what's happened to those children who've already gone through. I mean, thank goodness it's broadly been stopped on the NHS now, but actually we need that data. And as Claire was been talking about, the gender identity clinics and the GPs, though that's the sources of the information that needs to be mined to find out what's really been going on with these people.
And I think we need to extend what we do so that it includes slightly older people, young adults. And I think we also need to, at the moment, there's a loophole, isn't there? So you can't get puberty blockers under 18, but you can get cross-sex hormones at 16, is that right? In certain circumstances.
That's correct, which is concerning, yeah? Because I don't see how a 16-year-old can consent to infertility or possible infertility.
We wouldn't give another child treatment that could cause infertility unless there's a very, very good reason for it. And you'd be thinking about fertility preserving procedures to go through. But actually then, the other day I was looking on the website about how you might go ahead doing preserving, taking sperm samples and retrieving eggs. But actually the results are really quite poor, especially for a boy who hasn't gone through puberty, there is no way you'd be able to get any sperm that would be able to be used in the future. And then for girls with the eggs, if eggs are frozen, then actually the rate of pregnancy is very, very low. And I think, again, we're just not giving people the right information for this.
It's not just infertility, is it? It's all the other harms that we know about. I just don't know how young children or young adults or many adults can consent to these harms and consent to the unknown as well. That's the thing. There are so many unknowns. So you're asking patients to consent to a treatment, but there's a lot that we don't know about.
Yeah. I mean, urinary incontinence, you mentioned that. That's just completely debilitating. What about the regulating bodies? You mentioned some of them earlier. I mean, the BMA famously came out against the CAS review. What are your thoughts about the regulatory bodies?
I think it's really very sad that we have our professional bodies who don't seem to be able to stand back and have a look at the evidence and to understand what's really going on. This is one of the things that we've been trying to do. We have written to the GMC already, and we've got more signatures on another one. I think the BMA at the moment is quite possibly a lost cause, and I know that they have been very supportive of trans-identifying people and including going into the toilets of the opposite sex. And I think that they so much believe this thing that a man can become a woman, that they think those of us who are saying that actually the harms are really, really high and we shouldn't be doing this, especially to young people. I think they don't quite seem to be able to match the two together. I expect there are people within the organisation who are just having to ignore it. But I think it's very sad that we see the guidelines on the BMA website and the GMC website are pretty much encouraging us to have to prescribe.
The GMC also kind of endorses Bupath, which is known to have suppressed evidence that did not support the affirmative approach. So that's a big red flag to me as well, that they've been written with strong activist involvement in the guidelines.
Tell us in simple terms that a 5-year-old could understand what's the problem with WPATH. And I'm asking you this because I'm sort of very optimistic that at some point a GP who's sitting on the fence will be listening to this. Tell them about WPATH and WPATH guidelines.
It's a campaigning organisation, really, to reduce the age limit for transition right down to childhood, and to say that even really young children should be considered to have a trans identity. They talk about eunuch gender, that's as though it's a valid thing for somebody to have no gender at all, as in no sex at all. Some of their webinars, there's evidence on there that the people who are actually members of WPATH will actually admit that a boy who's been on a puberty blocker will never achieve orgasm, will never achieve sexual maturity, having been on puberty blockers. There's so many things that you look at this and you see that the outcomes of the treatment that they're proposing is so poor that actually you can really go back and have a look and show that they're really not evidence-based at all, compared with other organisations which try very much to have evidence for their treatments. So as GenSpect has got evidence-based guidelines for not, but that's affirming. And then there's another organisation, SEGM, and I can't remember what it stands for. And they have some really good videos, actually, webinars for people who are interested. So for parents and for clinicians to be able to go through and see what we should be doing for these patients.
I love the GenSpect statistics page where you can find
Stats for Gender.
It's fabulous.
Yes, Stats for Gender is a really good place to go.
That's right. So Google Stats for Gender if you want to know anything and everything.
Got lots of good information there.
Also, the report I mentioned by the Health and Human Services, the Gender Dysphoria report from the US, that goes into WPATH in good detail if anyone wanted any more information about why it shouldn't be used as best evidence.
Yes, that's a really good report. It's really informative and is more thorough than the CAS review as well in a lot of ways.
It seems, in a way, we started by asking you how a science-based profession could be overtaken. And yet when we see it, the cards are stacked against you. Somebody's created this sort of fake professional, but actually campaign group that you pay to be a member of. So anybody can be a member of that. And they've been following a forced trail and having things like the eunuch gender or the eunuch files in there. And then we've also got the regulating bodies who should be doing their homework just accepting those fake organisations and accepting Stonewall law. I imagine nearly all the GP practices across the country don't have the correct protected characteristics in. It's such a muddle.
Absolutely. It really is. I don't know. I just think that from a doctor point of view, I'm trying to be there to look after my patients and try to get them to the best possible health that they can be in. And I think all these interventions, these cross-sex interventions, just make people more unwell. We shouldn't be doing it at all. And I really want to hold some of these organisations to account.
The other thing is we're doing this because we care. It's not because we're transphobic at all. Just don't want our patients to be harmed. And really, that's at the root of it. It's because we are clinicians that care.
Yeah, I mean, what you're seeing of a group of very vulnerable people,
yes,
often autistic, often quite lonely. And from what you've said, some of them haven't got relationships already. And those people need your care and attention, and they don't need a panacea of drugs, as they see it, I think.
And they need to be told the truth as well, you know?
They deserve the truth, don't they?
Yes. They need to know that they can't actually change sex and that this is, it's extreme body modification. And they need to know that in law, actually, they cannot change sex in terms of the Equality Act, and that for most legal purposes, they will stay as the sex they were born as. And that is as things are. And we really should lying to people because that's not kind.
I'm going to pass across to Bex for a more sort of uplifting question.
Well, I mean, we sort of say uplifting. I suppose the easiest question to ask might be the hardest to answer. But what's the way forward from all of this? What steps do we need to take now to get ourselves back on the right path and set things right?
Clinicians need to be able to speak freely about their concerns. I think there's been a silencing of dissent. That has to go because I think a lot of clinicians are scared to speak out.
I think you're absolutely right, Claire. I think it's really important that doctors and, well, everyone really can actually talk about these things openly and honestly, and that we shouldn't be fearing for our careers or that somebody might be violent. You know, most of the people in the group are anonymous and feel that they can't let on in work or socially that they're part of the group in case something. And I think that's just really sad that, you know, we can't be open about it. So partly what we're trying to do is get some information out there so that GPs and other clinicians can see our information and see that it's okay to say, no, I'm not going to prescribe this and I am going to send you back to the gender identity clinic, because actually they're the people who are best placed to treat these patients. We're bringing out more information quite regularly. We've been looking at the harms of testosterone on. There's a yellow card scheme, and you can see that there are quite a lot of problems for people who take testosterone. And we've also been looking at the data there because it's really unclear whether that's boys or girls, young men or young women. And we've just had a bit of a look at that. And that's another blog we've got on our Substack, which is really interesting that all this data is hidden. So what we're trying to do, we're out there on X and on Twitter and on Substack, and we've got quite a following. But the thing is, it's all very well blogging, it's all very well tweeting, but actually we've got to do something. And we're really, really hoping we can build a body of people who can actually do something about this. But that's really hard because there's still a long, long way to go.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an amazing piece of work, and I really hope that you sort of achieve the outcomes you need to.
Well, we're meeting up with other groups of people in about a month in central London. So we hope that something will come of that. We've sort of trying to build up more of a group of clinicians and other influential people that we really hope can make a difference.
Fingers crossed, we'll be following along, I'm sure. So we come to our final question, which is the same question in every episode. And that is, who is your woman of the moment?
Well, I mean, there's so many women out there. There's so many people who have made such an impact with the gender debates, the gender versus sex. I mean, you know, people who from years ago I sort of noticed who were being cancelled for what they were saying, people like Jenny Murray and Germaine Greer. But actually, the people who really have been around for me, I mean, Emily, my sister, she got me reading Helen Joyce's book in the first instance, and she was sort of challenging me on when I was sort of being kind. So she is definitely somebody who's a woman who I'm very grateful for in all this. But then the other thing is my Women's Rights Network group. So people like Bev and Lizzie who've been out there in public and have really made a difference. And then all the other women, and I'm not going to name any other names because I don't know who's out and who isn't. But these are people who are just, you know, we support each other, and they are all fantastic people. Women.
Perfect answer. And Claire?
I've had a lot of support from very strong, honest and wise women around me that have really helped me to get to where I am. If I could, I would name you, and you know who you are. There are so many amazing women. I was trying to think of someone who had made a huge impact and has really been honest and brave and has shown a lot of wisdom recently. And it's not been easy for her. And that would be Kira Bell, because I think that she's really done a lot for us. She's got a lot of information out into the newspapers and into the public. And that wasn't easy for her to take a legal case against the Tavistock and against the government. I really admire her because she exposed the Tavistock for what it really was. And I think we're all very grateful.
Yeah, she's been incredibly brave, I think. And there's an awful lot of victim blaming that happens towards people with transition regret, desisters and detransitioners. And I think she sort of stood strong in the face of that and, you know, made her case in a way that I can really respect. So definitely good choice.
But it's really difficult, isn't it? You don't want to pick out one person or just a few people because, you know, there are so many, including you guys. I love your podcast.
Well, thank you so much for being on it. I mean, it's been an amazing episode.
It has. I mean, Honestly, it's just so great to hear from you, and it makes us quite hopeful, I think, doesn't it, Beck?
Yeah, I think so. I think what was really striking was the empathy and kindness you spoke about your patients with, and just how difficult of a situation medical staff are being put in. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you to our listeners. We really hope that you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, please do like, share, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff to help keep our channel growing and spread the word. Thank you.